You can't take one of these on the go, man. You gotta have power. Portable power. Well, kiddies, the Game Boy. Love the system. I know some of you do as well. It's a great 8-bit system, and sometimes the games might be a little harder to get these days. And we're going to talk about the Game Boy and its beautiful games after this. Well, the NES lasted about a decade with the release of the top loader. We got ours in '96. With over 200 million units sold worldwide and a lifespan spanning from the late 80s to about 2008, the Game Boy is one of Nintendo's most successful consoles, let alone handheld systems.
Before we begin, just a small disclaimer first. We are only going to discuss the North American releases and mostly the North American games. Both Japan and Europe may differ from what we discussed today. Now on to the rest of the video. The Game Boy was released in North America during the summer of 1989. The cost was between $89.99 and $100. The average Game Boy game retail cost is between $30 to $50, depending on the game. Interestingly enough, NES games also range between the $30 to $50 range when they first came out in the late 80s, early 90s. This also depended on the game, although some people have claimed upwards of $70 for games. I remember vividly the $25 to $50 price ticker, but that was my region, the Pacific Northwest. It might have been different in your area in the 80s or 90s. The Game Boy was created by Nintendo Research and Development 1, the team behind the Game & Watch series and several arcade games like Donkey Kong and its sequels. The Game Boy was either bundled with the game Tetris or just a standalone unit, just the Game Boy itself. Later releases would include different box styles and be bundled with other games. Like this example, it was bundled with Killer Instinct. I'll show you another one later on in the episode.
I got introduced to the Game Boy by my friend Qua on a camping trip. I remember him bringing the Game Boy and bringing a couple games. I think he brought Double Dragon and WWF Superstars. I was hooked, and I couldn't wait to get one of these myself.
You insert a game, also called Nintendo Game Pack or just a portable game pack back in the day, into the slot in the back of the unit. On top of the Game Boy is the on and off switch. The on and off switch includes a physical lockout mechanism to prevent a game from getting dislodged while the unit is on. Ooh, look, here comes the Nintendo logo coming down the screen. Speaking of the screen size is about 2.5 inches or 2.6 inches.
This little guy is heavy.
It took 4 AA batteries. The claim was batteries should last 10 hours. Yeah, right, more like 8 if you're lucky. It drains faster than playing Tetris on max when your eyes are closed. The level will be over before you know it. 2 to 3 hours max in reality. Just enough time for a drive to the beach. There is a rechargeable battery pack. It doesn't drain as fast as it should, and I emphasize should, last about 10 hours. It too is a beast. It's sort of heavy. You can clip it on the go and walk in game. We didn't have the problem of texting and driving in 1989. Just don't walk into the street while playing the Game Boy. Unlike the Sega Game Gear, which was in color, the Game Boy isn't in color, it's monochrome. The Game Boy's greenish-yellow screen stands out among its rivals. I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or a good thing. The Game Boy Advance plays in black and white. This looks so much clearer and better. The original model, you can change the density of the screen, making it brighter or darker. And sometimes that was helpful in low light settings. The Game Boy itself does not have backlight capabilities. There are other devices made to help brighten up the screen. The Game Boy itself is fashioned as a big NES controller. There are the exact same buttons between both and they function the same way. There is the D-pad, select, start, B and A. You pick up an NES controller and it feels very similar to playing a Game Boy. The Game Boy is just bigger and heavier. DMG stands for Dot Matrix Game. These are the original Game Boy games, and they are labeled as such.
You will notice it says DMG. That stands for Dot Matrix Game.
Unlike the NES, which has a region lockout chip, the Game Boy is
region free, so you can play games from Japan and other countries.
Yes, the Game Boy is region free. On a Game Boy cart or game pack, you'll have its region listed. Here's an example, DMG SS USA, Solar Striker. This is the NTSC release. This is a European game, DMG SC UKV, Solomon's Club. And here's the North American version. Oh, and here's my Burger Time from China, DMG 129CHN. They all play on the Game Boy. The Game Boy plays in mono. It only has one speaker, but due to its headphone jack, you can't play in stereo if you use headphones or external speakers. Here is the volume control. It goes up and down. In 1995, Nintendo rebranded the Game Boy with several different colored Game Boy models, advertising them as Play It Loud. Besides the different color cases, the Game Boy is built the exact same way as it did in 1989. After the Play It Loud series, Nintendo released the Game Boy Pocket. Nintendo added several improvements to the Pocket. The body was less thick, it took fewer batteries, and the screen was true black and white. The biggest improvement was the screen size. It was bigger than the Game Boy. Nintendo finally dived into the handheld color market with the Game Boy Color. This newest addition to the Game Boy family was released in 1998. It's an improvement over the Game Boy and the Game Boy Pocket, because now games can be played in color. Although the screen size is smaller than the Game Boy Pocket. The Game Boy Color takes two AA batteries, and the batteries didn't drain as fast as the original. It was backwards compatible, so it played both Game Boy and its own Game Boy Color games. It was discontinued from stores in 2003. The Game Boy Advance hit retail shelves in 2001. It had its own library of games, Game Boy Advance or just GBA, but it played both Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles. An improved model to the Game Boy Advance was released 3 years later in 2004, called the Game Boy Advance SP. This was an easier console to transport, and it was easy to carry in your pocket. I liked the design. The Game Boy Micro was released in 2005. It was by far the smallest of the Game Boy consoles. It cannot play Game Boy or Game Boy Color games. It only played Game Boy Advance titles. It was the last of the Game Boy line, and it ended in 2008.
In 1994, the best video game attachment was released for the Super Nintendo, and that was the Super Game Boy. Retailed for about $60. It allowed gamers to play Game Boy games on a Super Nintendo. The Super Game Boy cannot play Game Boy Color games, even though it slides in perfectly and looks like it will fit, and it'll tell you this.
Just DMG and some Game Boy Color games. Those black cartridges, they are also Game Boy Color and Game Boy games.
It was a great add-on for the Super Nintendo.
The Super Game Boy does play games a little faster, and so does its audio. About 2% difference. By using the Super Game Boy, you can change the background of your play screen. Some games with the Super Game Boy logo were given this special treatment and demonstrated some really neat effects and surprises. The Game Boy version of Space Invaders allowed players to play both the Super Nintendo version of the game as well as a colored version of the Game Boy game.
Super Game Boy! Now you're playing portable power on Super Power. Now satisfied with the Super Game Boy? But you have a GameCube? Well, I recommend the Game Boy Player. It plays Game Boy Advance games, original Game Boy games, and even Game Boy Color games. It is the whole package, ready to play all your Game Boy games. Does have one little catch though. Make sure you have the disc. Without it, the Game Boy Player is useless. Remember earlier I talked about a Game Boy I would show you? I was talking about this one. This one was bundled with Super Mario Land 2. This one was a special offer. Well, let's look inside what a Game Boy in the box would look like in its contents. Alright, so here's the Game Boy. Alright, let's see what else is in here. We got a bunch of stuff. Looks like a sales brochure, probably a Nintendo Power ad. Something else is buried in here. Okay, just like what to do with your Game Boy, important notices. Alright, you got the instruction manual for Super Mario Land 2. And the instruction manual for the Game Boy. And what's this? Oh, just another... Oh, yeah. Alright, here's the back side of the box. As you can see, it was bought in 1994. And here's the side of the box. Hey, let's not stop there. Let's look at what a Game Boy box looks like. Alright, this is Revenge of the Gator, a pinball game I'll talk about later in the episode. Here's the top of the box, and here's the back side. Okay. Alright, opening up, here is a clear protectorate with a clamshell protecting the Game Boy game. And this is the instruction manual for Revenge of the Gator. And here's just a little bit what it looks like inside. You see some gameplay stuff and some levels. Oh, this is Kirby Pinball Land. As you see, it has a golden Game Boy seal. And also it has the Player's Choice Million Seller logo by Nintendo. This is the back side of the box, just advertising. This is Donkey Kong. Alright, here's the back side of the box. Okay, inside we're opening it up, and as you can see, it actually has a paper instead of the clear one, and here's just some stuff. Whoa! Well, this is actually kind of cool. This is just a play it loud, just advertising a bunch of games for the Game Boy. It's kind of cool. Okay, wait a minute, there's one more thing, and here is the Donkey Kong instruction manual. Because of the size of the Game Boy game packs, they're just tiny little guys. They're easy to store, and that's one great advantage of collecting for the Game Boy. They're storage savers, and you can collect a lot of them and still have plenty of room for more.